Alex Salmond.
Well, Assalamu alaikum. I differ from the three other members of the panel. Firstly, because I think these matters should be a responsibility of the Scottish Parliament and the responsibility of all of us as human beings. But I'm not actually sure that their literal interpretation of the Scotland Act is correct. If we believe in the case of ghost flights or rendition flights a criminal offence has been committed in Scottish territory, then we should be sending the police to arrest those we believe are committing the criminal offence. And that should be our position. Because if you turn a blind eye and say, oh, it's nothing to do with us, it's to do with these big bad boys and girls down at Westminster, then you are complicit in the offence itself. You cannot walk by the other side, turn your face away and pretend it wasn't happening just because it's inconvenient that it happens to be touching down at Prestwick. So I would say send the police to arrest them. And secondly, on an area which in terms touches on defence, about the refuelling of the busting bombs for the Lebanon at Prestwick, I think it's very instructive indeed to contrast the different position of the Scottish Executive and the UK Government with the position taken by the Irish Government, where Shannon was turned down as a potential refuelling stopover centre even before the question was asked. Now the reason for that, incidentally, wasn't just that hopefully islands would have wanted to refuse permission anyway, despite their friendship with the United States of America. The reason, of course, was that Irish troops were serving in the Lebanon under the aegis of the United Nations, so potentially these bunker-busting bombs, if they had gone through Shannon, could have been used potentially to kill Irish troops, never mind Lebanese civilians. And I look forward to the day when there is no dubiety, there is no doubt about our responsibilities, and Scotland is in a position to say no to rendition flights and no to refuelling of bunker-busting bombs on Scottish soil.
Following on from what Alex has said, I'd like to bring it back to the three other panel members. The issue was raised about the Scottish Parliament doesn't have responsibility. The question I'd like to ask on the bill is, how do people who were tied up, gagged and handcuffed in CIA flights or rendition flights give evidence that they're landing at Prestwick Airport?
With considerable difficulty, obviously. You know, how do you actually find out what has happened? Yes, you know, it's virtually impossible. But the British government should be making much more detailed inquiries.
Do you not think the Scottish Parliament has a responsibility?
The Scottish Parliament has responsibility for what is delegated to it in the Scotland Act. Until such time as that is amended, the Scottish Parliament does not have a responsibility any more than Glasgow City Council would have.
Margaret?
Well, in a sense, I think that in terms of our jurisdictions, if there was a criminal offence, we did believe that to be happening, we could argue that we do have responsibility for that. I think the difficulty is that Margaret Beckett, as Foreign Secretary at the time, I understand, I think she was Foreign Secretary at the time, made it very clear that if there was evidence, that then that would be pursued, and there was no evidence of that happening at all. And just because an allegation has been made doesn't mean to say you can direct all the Scottish police forces to raiding planes. I just don't think that would be a logical thing to do. But of course, if there is evidence of torture, of course you should take action to deal with it.
Robert?
I think the issue, the trouble with the position on this one, of course, is that, again, it comes back to the position that the UK Labour government has had in this particular regard. Because, I mean, make no mistake about it, things which happened in that particular regard would have been known about to the Foreign Office and to the British government. I think it's highly unlikely that things of that sort were not known about to the government. Now, we're not in a position to know about that as individual citizens either here or indeed in England, and therefore to take action to stop it. I think Alex's suggestion about sending the police is all very well, it's a good debating point. It's not really the reality of the position. What we need to do, in fact, is to have changes in government policy in London, which actually has the principal responsibility in these matters to avoid a situation where we're tied in such a close and unsatisfactory and unprincipled way with the policy of the United States government, which I think is at the heart of all the problems we face in this particular regard.
Can I bring in members of the audience? Rosemary from the Greens.
Yeah, just very quickly, the Greens were the people that first raised this issue in the Scottish Parliament. Secondly, customs officers have the ability to go and look in planes where they suspect that any things are being smuggled, and therefore it seems to me that where torture is suspected, and Amnesty International produced a list of the registration numbers of the planes, so the evidence was there. The customs officers and police officers could have boarded the planes. And thirdly, Wick Airport and Liberties Airport are actually publicly owned airports, and so the Scottish Parliament did actually have the power to forbid any kind of rendition flights landing at those airports, and they did land at those airports.
The next question is from Nadine.
That's me. The question's on Islamophobia, but I'd just like to give some background if I may. Just this month there was an incident whereby an Algerian woman, along with her 1-year-old son, was attacked by 4 youths who hurled stones and attempted an indecent assault. So the panellists agree that Islamophobia is actually a distinct form of prejudice, and as a result it requires its own specific strategy to deal with it.
I think it probably does. I mean, let me say first of all that I agree entirely with the horror that's been expressed, I think, across Scotland by many people about this particular occurrence, which seems to me to be amongst the nastiest ones I think I've heard about in a long time. I think it'll probably be shared across the panel. But let me say beyond that, the issue is how we actually create circumstances where these things are significantly, substantially, much less likely to happen. It's not an easy thing to resolve. I mean, I think you could get equivalent issues from different sectors of society who regard themselves as being discriminated against by the bulk of the population, or by individuals within it. And there's been calls, as you know, and quite a lot of discussion about having exacerbated crimes, if you like, in terms of the offences that can be put before the courts in this kind of way. Now, the trouble is, if you identify all sorts of different things as being something which should have higher penalties attached to them, for example, I think it's probably the wrong way to go. The way I'd like to go about this is to try and deal with it in terms of education and understanding. There's been quite a lot of good work done by the Scottish Executive, again, as an all-party thing, I think, in that regard, on the anti-sectarian front. And that's had, I think, significant, but I think you can see from the difficulties that it has had also as well, where it's had significant process in terms of moving that particular aspect forward. I agree with you. I think we do need a strategy which will actually look at this in a number of details. In fairness to the Executive, there has been quite a bit of activity through the Communities Department and otherwise through the Education Department over the last few years to try and deal with this. But I think if we're going to get a recurrence and an increase in incidents like this, I think the figures recently suggest we perhaps are, against the background of international episodes as well, I think we probably need to look at this with renewed vigour, with a view to trying to stamp it out before it actually gets off the ground further, and try and make sure that Islamophobia is not, in fact, a word which has a currency, if you like, in Scottish society in terms of the real experience of people.
Alex?
Well, we already have the principle that racially aggravated and sectarian attacks do and should carry enhanced penalties in order to stamp out these particularly vicious assaults. And the assault on the Algerian asylum seeker and her 1-year-old baby was a particularly vicious, savage example of that. And I am sure that the police in Glasgow are going to be pursuing that to the nth degree, and I understand that there is a reward being offered within the community to try and get the perpetrators of that assault brought to book. So that's the specific